Some towns don't make the headlines. They're not so showy. They don't always feature in the tourist guidebooks or the history books. But that doesn't mean they didn't play a significant role. It's important to remember that history doesn't always just happen in the big flashy castles and the supersized museums. That little understated towns have so much to offer if you just know where to look. Hi, I'm Justine, the nerdy half of the Breakaway Bravehearts, and today we're walking through Colwyn Bay in North Wales, a town whose strength lies not in spectacle, but in quiet service. From healing the sick, to sheltering refugees, to feeding a nation. Its story isn't flashy, but it's important. Walk just a few minutes further up the coastline and you'll find Rhos-on-Sea, a place associated with pirates. Well, kind of. Today as you walk along the promenade, you'll see families laughing and enjoying the peaceful seaside. But this coastline has been the centre of fishing rights disputes since the Middle Ages. Back in those days, this part of North Wales wasn't as settled as it is right now. Coastal communities relied on the sea as a source of food and income, but they had to fight for the right to use it. And they were competing with smugglers, raiders, pirates, and their own governing crown and the church. Here at low tide, you can still see the remains of a centuries-old stone fish trap, a medieval weir. This was a hugely significant resource, and whoever controlled it had serious leverage. Weirs like this were points of contention, and there were clashes between local fishermen and royal agents. Legal records show rules imposed, challenged, and ignored. Then in the 16th century, a man named Henry Morgan, a sea captain licensed by the Crown, was given full legal ownership over the Rhos-on-Sea weir. He was a sea rover licensed under the letters of marque. If you look him up on Google, you might want to search for Henry the Pirate. He and those under his command raided settlements and shipping ports on the Spanish Main, becoming very wealthy as they did so. With all the prize money and loot from the raids, Morgan purchased 3 large sugar plantations in Jamaica and later became the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. You see, a letter of marque is a license, a certificate, that allows you to raid and seize Spanish ships legally, at least under British law. But it seems Henry's reputation as a swashbuckling pirate was a little bit overblown. What happened was a disgruntled former seafaring colleague wrote a tell-all memoir portraying Henry Morgan as a torturer. Henry actually won a libel suit against the book's publishers, but the reputation never faded. And after his death, Henry Morgan was used as an exemplar pirate in model piracy fiction works. So while he probably wasn't drinking rum, chatting with his parrot, or walking prisoners off the plank into the waters of Colwyn Bay, he was a key figure in the exploitation of resources and control of this coastline. That's what makes this beach a good place to start this story, because the town around us has been shaped by how the local people have responded to big threats across the sea. Throughout the centuries, as the people of Colwyn Bay moved with the tide, their stories shifted, gradually at first, and then rapidly in the 19th century, as local life became less about survival and more about sanctuary. This shoreline has changed, not just physically, but in its purpose. Just up the coast, Llandudno was being transformed into a fully fledged Victorian resort, something we dive into more in our video on its curious and carefully planned development. And by the turn of the 20th century, this stretch of sea had gone from a place of conflict to a place of care, because Colwyn Bay was also beginning to reinvent itself. By the 19th century, Colwyn Bay was a prosperous holiday resort. But it wasn't just vacations on the agenda. The tranquil sea air and the peaceful setting was perfect for recovery, and Colwyn Bay became a magnet for convalescent care. Not the big, huge institutions like those in the Alps, but smaller, private care homes who looked after people recovering from surgery, illness, or industrial fatigue. These smaller institutions were often set up by charities. In 1899, the town opened the Colwyn Bay Cottage Hospital, an institution that was funded by public subscription. That's the kind of crowdfunding that existed before the internet. You can still spot architectural clues. Buildings with sun balconies, long rows of narrow windows, and verandas, either perched on the hillside or within walking distance to the beach, were probably once convalescent homes. What's fascinating is how health and leisure started to overlap. What we think of today as a necessary mental holiday and a break by the seaside grew out of these historical medical practices. What began as treatment for the sick gradually turned into a chance for ordinary people to take a break and enjoy nature, a concept that shaped tourism for decades to come. And the sun wasn't shining on just the patients. The sanatoriums and health homes created a positive ripple effect throughout the town, creating jobs, bringing in new residents, and shaping the social life. Nurses and caregivers moved in to board with local families, and cafes served customers who were patients in recovery. All of this helped create a community of care, welcoming to strangers. So it's probably not surprising when, in the 20th century, Colwyn Bay opened its doors to people fleeing war and persecution. During World War I, 250,000 Belgian refugees landed in Britain, trying to escape after their country was invaded by Germany. Wales hosted 1,500 of them, and small North Wales towns like Colwyn Bay did whatever they could to help out. And the Colwyn Bay community rallied together to see what they could do for them. Churches held donation drives, and local boarding houses and even private homes opened their doors to Belgian families. The numbers weren't huge, but Colwyn Bay was part of a national mobilisation, helping out foreigners in need. But while small charities drummed up local pride and the papers praised the community's generosity, it was messy. Below the surface, there was tension. And that makes it more human. People worried about the cost, and locals were worried that the Belgian tradesmen were going to take all the jobs. When you look at council meeting minutes from the time, there was real debate over who should foot the bill for housing and supporting these refugees. But on the whole, the response was extraordinary. Colwyn Bay, like many small towns across Britain, quietly helped thousands of people escape a war they never asked for. Many Belgian refugees stayed on for years, establishing families and lives here. Even Agatha Christie pays tribute to this new part of the British population with her famous detective, Hercule Poirot. So fast forward to the 1930s, 1940s, and Britain and Colwyn Bay was ready to help again. Europe was on edge again. The Nazis had taken power in Germany, and once more people needed to flee their homes. But this time it wasn't entire families arriving, it was children on their own. Britain agreed to take in unaccompanied children, mostly Jewish, through what became known as the Kindertransport. Nearly 10,000 children were rescued from Germany and brought to Britain, with some finding refuge across North Wales. Colwyn Bay hosted many of these children, fostering them in their homes and raising money so they could attend local schools and continue their education. It's hard to imagine what that must have felt like as a kid, being ripped away from your family and sent to a foreign land where you don't speak the language and you don't know the culture. And you don't know if you'll ever see your parents or your homeland again. So for the people of Colwyn Bay to open their arms and offer them safety in a place where they can just be kids again, that's an amazing part of history that should be acknowledged and remembered. These acts of generosity didn't make the headlines, but they saved futures. Most visitors to towns like this now quietly walk past these spots, never knowing the deeper history and significance. The rooms you've booked through booking.com could once have been a sanctuary for grateful refugees who shared supper with their generous hosts. And this wouldn't be the only quiet but vital role that Colwyn Bay played in a time of national crisis. As World War II raged on, this peaceful stretch of coastline became the central hub for one of the nation's greatest logistical challenges, the feeding of Britain. Literally. While most people associate World War II with tanks, trenches and code breaking, the real battle for survival also came down to calories. And Colwyn Bay played a huge role in strategically and secretly planning for that battle. In 1940, bombs were falling in London, and the British government realised that it needed to relocate its key ministries, one of the most important being the Ministry of Food. And so it was here, in the peaceful town of Colwyn Bay, that thousands of civil servants were relocated, most of them staying in boarding houses and hotels like the Princess Court behind me. The work was complex. Staff had to keep track of shipping routes, constantly interrupted by war, weather damage and changes in population. Behind these unremarkable windows, they were calculating exactly how much butter or bacon that the average citizen could get by on each week. And the numbers were tight. The Ministry of Food had the job of managing rationing, nutritional planning, and wartime agriculture. When they were relocated here, dozens of boarding houses suddenly became makeshift offices, filled with civil servants working to keep 47 million people fed. So here's a rough idea of what rationing looked like at its peak. Each week, each person was allocated 2 ounces of butter and 4 ounces of bacon. That's just over 50 grams of bacon and roughly 4 rashers. You could also have 2 ounces of cheese, and you could have 8 ounces of sugar. And because you're British, obviously you're going to need tea. You get 2 ounces of that a week. You could also have an egg, and if you're lucky, it will be fresh. Otherwise, you're going to have to go with the powdered. You might get some powdered milk. If you're lucky, you may get some fresh milk. If you want fruit and veggies, those are not rationed, but you're going to have to probably grow them on your own or do a deal with your neighbours. You could also have bread, but it won't be white. White bread is out. You can have wholemeal bread. That's all good. That was supplied. Or bread that's made with potato flour. Take your pick there. You can also, of course, have your own fruit. So as long as you had an apple tree, you could have a tasty apple. But you can't have a banana. So I asked myself, how come sugar was prioritized over bananas? Not a fan of bananas, so I'm okay with that, but this does seem the healthier option. But bananas have to be shipped here through war-infested waters, and they're perishable. Whereas sugar, you can get much more into a boat, it has much higher calories, and it's less perishable. So this guy is going to win every time. That's how priorities were made. The result was a culinary culture of creativity, with recipes like the Woolton pie, which contained no meat, and national campaigns for carrot sandwiches. Basically, they encouraged people to come up with recipes that should just make do with whatever they had. But not everybody played fair. If you had money, you could dine out, and restaurants weren't held to the same strict limits. This caused a bit of resentment. While the working class were measuring out margarine with teaspoons, those that were well off could avoid the shortages by dining out. The ministry really had its hands full. At the same time as trying to build up public confidence, they also had to clamp down on forgeries, hoarding, and the black market. While some staff were busy coordinating national campaigns like Dig for Victory and Grow Your Own, others were busy raiding illegal butcheries and prosecuting those who sold cheese under the counter. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential. And Colwyn Bay was the perfect place for this low-profile operation. The town was chosen for its great transport, its already excellent hotel infrastructure, and its relative obscurity. At the time, visitors had no idea that the food policy for a nation under siege was being drafted above a quiet seaside cafe. The Ministry of Food was helping win the war, not through might, but through calories. I just couldn't do a banana. I truly hate bananas. So when you string it all together, you get a small coastal town that struggled with fishing rights, that's helped people with their health issues, that's provided housing for strangers, that's helped a nation feed its people. These are not just fragments of history, they're part of a pattern. Britain has survived and changed not just through London and Parliament, but through small towns like Colwyn Bay, who have quiet communities providing their contribution to their country. For me, it's important to remember that little towns and local people contributed to who we are today. Well, next I'm off to Anglesey, and I hope you'll join me there and we'll find out what history lies hidden beneath. Until then, happy travels everyone!